Hello, everyone. It's good to be back. Today, I will talk to Monica Dobbins. And Monica is a Unitarian Universalist minister serving the First Unitarian Church in Salt Lake City, Utah. First of all, hello, Monica.
Hello, thank you for having me.
No problem. I'm very happy that you were able to come and be a part. So a quick background is that I have studied a number of religions recently, and I have been very interested and intrigued with the Unitarian Universalist religion. And I wanted to find someone, who is a member of the church that could talk to me about the church. And thanks to a good friend, Jared Anderson, I was able to meet up with Monica, and Monica was so kind to come on this podcast. So again, so Monica is a minister serving the First Unitarian Church in Salt Lake City, Utah. And she has a bachelor's degree in education and graduated from Meadville Lombard Theological School in Chicago, Illinois in 2017 with a Master of Divinity degree. And her work in Salt Lake includes preaching, religious education for adults, and social justice work with an emphasis on immigration reform and healthcare. She is married, and she and her partner have one child. So this was was everything correct?
Yes, thank you.
Yes, all right. So before I start asking Monica about the Unitarian Universalist Church, I thought for the listeners and viewers, I will give a very brief introduction. And I will just read from the start of the Wikipedia article about Unitarian Universalism. So it says, Unitarian Universalism, or UU, is a liberal religion characterized by a free and responsible search for truth and meaning. Unitarian Universalist asserts no creed, but instead are unified by their shared search for spiritual growth, guided by a dynamic, living tradition. Currently, these traditions are summarized by the 6 sources and 7 principles of Unitarian Universalism. Documents recognized by all congregations who choose to be a part of the Unitarian Universalist Association. And Monica will tell us then later about the 6 sources and 7 principles, I'm sure. So these documents are living, meaning always open for revisiting and reworking. UU congregations include many atheists, agnostics, and theists within their membership. And there are UU churches, fellowships, congregations, and societies around the world. Now, I will insert here that I did some study, and there are none in Estonia, from what I understand, but they are widespread in the United States. So, okay, I'll keep reading from Wikipedia. The roots of Unitarian Universalism lie in liberal Christianity, specifically Unitarianism and Universalism. Unitarian Universalists state that from these traditions comes a deep regard for intellectual freedom and inclusive love. Congregations and members seek inspiration and derive insight from all major world religions. Yeah, I guess, I'll read the following paragraph also. The beliefs of individual Unitarian Universalists range widely and can include humanism, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, Hinduism, Sikhism, Buddhism, Taoism, syncretism, I don't know what this is, omnism, neo-paganism, atheism, agnosticism, pantheism, panentheism, pandeism, deism, and the teachings of the Baha'i faith. Wow, I like it. I like it a lot, actually. But now this is what the Wikipedia says. But now we're able to find out if there's any truth to what I just read. But like in general, like your first impression, how did it sound, Monica?
It sounded pretty accurate. Yeah. I think that the majority of Unitarian Universalists in the United States are seekers, people who are inspired by a wide range of religious as well as humanist thought. As you were listing the different religions there in that last paragraph, I was thinking of, yes, I know this person who brought their Sikhism to Unitarian Universalism. I thought of this person who's Jewish and is a UU. And so, yeah, I think that there are a wide range of beliefs and cultures represented within our faith.
Okay, so how about I just follow up on this right away? So do you find that many people who attend Unitarian Universalist congregations, are they, so to speak, double dippers? Does it mean that they are in two religions? They attend their, let's say, their original religion, and then they also go to the Unitarian Universalism, or have they mostly like totally committed to the UU, and then this is just their roots? How do you see it?
Yeah, I think the second one is closer to our practice more widely. What I love about Unitarian Universalism, and I think what attracted me to this faith several years ago when I became a UU, is that I felt that it was a place that I could bring my whole self, that I have Christian roots. I grew up in a Christian church, but I was a practicing Buddhist for 10 years and also had some experience with neo-pagan movement here in the United States. So when I found the Unitarian Universalist Church, I felt like all of those parts of my religious journey were welcome in this church, and that other people were bringing with them what they carried from the past of their lives, and so that we were able to all learn from each other, from the parts that we loved as well as the parts that had hurt us in the past. We were able to bring all of that together and see what religious truth could be found in all of that diversity.
That's very good. I will definitely like to follow up on your own journey afterwards, but for the audience, to set the stage even more, could you help us like situate the UU a little bit more in the religious, let's say, traditions, or like just kind of a brief overview of the history? Would you be able to do that?
Sure. So the story of Unitarian Universalism is really the story of these two movements within Christianity, both of which in their own way go all the way back to the time when Jesus was alive himself. Unitarianism basically came out of this idea that Jesus is not a divine person, that Jesus was a human being just like us, and that he was no more divine than any other human being. Now, this debate about the divinity of Jesus, as I said, goes all the way back to when Jesus was alive himself. Is Jesus a God, or is Jesus a participant in the divine person? Unitarians came down pretty firmly that no, Jesus was only human. So you see these characters during the Reformation, like Socinus and notably Miguel Serveto, who's sometimes known as Michael Servetus, who was burned at the stake for his belief that Jesus was not divine. So Unitarianism has always been a heresy, and at times it was considered sort of an insult for Christians. Well, you're nothing better than a Unitarian. But William Ellery Channing was an American minister who really sort of flipped the script on that. He said that Unitarianism was its own religious tradition, that it had value, and that it wasn't an insult, that it was okay to be a Unitarian. He preached this famous sermon called Unitarian Christianity that sort of was the root of American Unitarianism. And he was the founder of the American Unitarian Association. And on the other
Quickly,
side, yeah.
before we go to the other side, I want to just ask, because for some people, it might be sort of there's no link there between rejecting Jesus's divinity and then the term Unitarianism. So where's the connection there?
So Unitarianism is sort of in contrast to Trinitarianism, the idea that God is in three persons, God, Spirit, and Jesus. But Unitarianism says God is one, that there's no division within within the Godhead, that and separating Jesus out from that.
So basically, then the Unitarianists rejected the Nicene Creed, if I understand correctly.
Yes, that is correct.
Oh, okay, good. And does that also mean that then the Universalists, the Unitarians also rejected like the original sin and the atonement and these things, or how is their relation to those?
Yes, over time, Unitarians came to reject all of those things as well. And the Universalists were very notable in rejecting original sin. So this is one tie between Unitarians and Universalists through religious history. The Universalists sort of come up as a response to Calvinism, not only to original sin from the Catholic tradition, but also to this idea that human beings are naturally depraved, that we're born into evil, that we can't help being bad. Universalists said no. God is love and God is goodness. God can only create goodness. And so human beings must be at their core good. And we're born for goodness, and we seek connection to other people and connection to God as an expression of our nature, as of our human nature. So the Universalists really rejected both original sin and that sort of depravity that Calvin posited. Universalism really reaches its full expression in the United States. George de Benneville was a minister who really spread Universalism through early America. And it becomes this, the Universalist Church of America becomes this movement that actually becomes very popular in pre-Civil War America. This idea that human beings are good and we're made for good.
And if I remember correctly, then one of the major tenets of the Universalists was that there is no hell, basically.
That's a big one. Yes, we believe that there is no hell, that a good God would not condemn his creations or their creations, as we say now with gender neutrality toward God, that God would not condemn their creations to punishment, but that all people have access to salvation. So what's
is there temporary punishment for the bad people, or no?
Well, in historic Universalism, this was a big debate, whether God would punish you for a little while and then take you to heaven, or whether you would just go straight to heaven. Now it's not, we've kind of left that debate behind.
Sure.
But that was an important historic debate for sure.
Okay. But you were going to say something. I think I jumped in.
No. So where Unitarianism and Universalism sort of travel this evolutionary road through the 19th century and into the 20th century, where Unitarianism becomes more and more humanist as they have rejected the divinity of God. Many of them start to reject divinity altogether, or to say that divinity we no longer think of it in the way that we've thought of it historically. Maybe the universe is divine, or maybe the earth is divine, but we don't put that the locus of divinity only on God.
Mhm.
Universalists, on the other side, are starting to realize that if universalism, if access to salvation is open to everyone, then that means everyone around the world. And so all religions provide a path to salvation, that it's not just through Christianity, but that all people have access to God in this way. So by the time they come together in 1961 to form one faith, Unitarian Universalism, you have this really rich theological tradition of open access to salvation, open access to divinity, a real questioning of what divinity is. And so this new faith that is born is very humanistic in nature, very optimistic, has a very optimistic view of human nature. And I think that that's the tradition that we claim today.
Mhm. And so, as I understand that, that there are no specific creeds, right? And rather there are these 6 sources and 7 principles. Can you
Yes,
introduce those a little bit?
sure. So let me start with the 7 principles. The inherent worth and dignity of every person, justice, equity, and compassion in human relations, acceptance of one another and encouragement to spiritual growth in our congregations, a free and responsible search for truth and meaning, the right of conscience and the use of the democratic process within our congregations and in society at large, the goal of world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all, and the 7th principle, respect for the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part. And I'm proud to say that the Unitarian Universalist Association is now considering whether to add an 8th principle. The 8th principle would call us into a deliberate consideration of systemic racism in our institutions and in ourselves, and a commitment to breaking down that systemic racism where we find it. So it's exciting work. We think it's going to take a couple more years to get it done, but many congregations are considering adding that 8th principle now.
So this all sounds very, how should I say, humanistic, also very progressive, very liberal, and basically at the heart of it is the worth of the individual and respecting all individuals, right? And so, was there one that also talked about basically taking care of and the environment and respecting the environment?
Yes, the 7th principle, I think, was really conceived in the sort of nascent environmental movement in the United States, but it also speaks to how we live in community. The respect for the interdependent web of all life of which we are a part kind of takes human beings off the top of the pyramid, as Christianity has often conceived of humanity, and puts it in the middle as part of this web, that we depend on other things for our survival, and then other things depend on us. That's a really beautiful way of thinking about it, but it also sort of deconstructs this principle in Christianity and in other religions that human beings are responsible for the stewardship of the earth. It takes us off of that and says we have responsibilities among us.
Okay. And this all also sounds like it's very in tune with modern science also, and let's say modern the problems of more modern civilizations. It tries to address those, and so I can imagine there's quite a bit of let's say fluidity, and like it says, there's that you are able to respond to human and civilization's problems as they come up. And so there's this responsibility about the the life on earth and the worth of every individual. Now, on the other hand, having no certain distinct creeds, does that create a let's say some kind of a problem of identification or of unity among members? What is the day-to-day experience in the UU congregations? I understand that people are encouraged to have, let's say, different viewpoints, and they're not they're encouraged to seek the truth on their own, and there's no predetermined creeds. Are there any tensions in connection with that, or how is it working day to day?
That's such an interesting question. And I think where I'd like to start to answer it is to talk about the way that Unitarian Universalists are organized. So we follow what's called congregational polity, which means that we don't have bishops, we don't answer to a higher authority within the church. Each congregation is independent, and we organize our relationships around the practice of covenant. So covenant means just the agreements that we have about how we will be together and how we'll treat each other. What that produces is each congregation in the United States is really unique and different and has its own sort of personality, if you will. We have congregations, particularly in the Northeast, which are still Christian, which still practice communion every Sunday and recite scripture together, Christian scripture. And then there are congregations in other parts of the country that have a real connection to earth-centered traditions, paganism, and even Native American traditions, depending on where you are in the country. It brings a lot of diversity to Unitarian Universalism, and it focuses practice in a congregation on local culture, which is really unique. Now, on the flip side, because we don't have a creed that we share, we have to do that hard work of building relationships. People are still people. We're not perfect. We're still prone to ego and to all of these other, the things that can muddy up human relationships. And so this practice of covenant is ideally supposed to bring us back into relationship over and over and over again. But it does mean that there are disagreements in congregations and between congregations of what it means to live out our faith. For me, that's really beautiful because we're not going for conformity. For us, diversity is the strength and the beauty of our faith tradition. And it's messy. It's messy work.
It's very interesting, and in a way, it's very much in contrast to the tradition that I am used to, the Latter-day Saint tradition. Mm-hmm. So, like, for example, one question that arises is in me is like for example, some people feel, and it seems to be like the traditional religion's purpose is to make sure that people will behave, because when there is hellfire awaiting them, then they will not cause too much trouble, or they will behave somewhat civilly. Now, in the UU tradition, this is not on the table, so to speak, right? So how in individual lives, how are people able to express kindness, love, charity, respect towards one another, and commit to living, let's say, the higher law, or living in accordance with higher principles, when there's no intrinsic threat that they might be punished on the other side?
You know, what's so funny is that this is actually a really old argument against universalism going back into our 18th century roots. One of the common complaints about universalism was, well, how are you going to get people to behave if there's no hell, if there's no threat of punishment? But that threat of punishment is not endemic to the world's religions. Most world religions don't have a threat of punishment. In fact, many world religions don't have as concrete of an idea of the afterlife as Christians have. And especially Christians in the United States have a very strong sense of afterlife punishment and reward. So for us, it's sort of like, well, you know, that's a question from a particular framework. As I mentioned before, Unitarian Universalists tend to have a very high opinion of human nature. We're very optimistic about human nature. And at the same time, our practices of covenant means that ideally within our faith tradition, there is accountability in this life between each other, that we can say to each other, because we've built this trust among each other, we can say, you're not being your best self. You know, I can expect better of you because I know you're capable of better. And that human beings do have the capacity for reflection, for introspection, to look at ourselves and say, am I really being the best that I can be? And knowing that when we do our best, this life rewards us. The best reward that we can expect is to have a good life and to have good relationships, to see love multiply. Those are good rewards by themselves.
Mm-hmm. And from what I've read about Unitarian Universalism, that on the contrary, the UU has always been on the forefront of social justice, and they're not just sitting idly, just hedonistically, taking advantage of the pleasures of the world. On the other hand, they're very much concerned with questions of social justice and so forth. Can you comment on that a little bit?
Absolutely. Many Unitarian Universalists do not believe in an afterlife at all. And many Unitarian Universalists do not believe in a God that will come and fix our problems for us. So, we don't have this saving God, and we don't have this, things are bad in this life, but they'll be better in the next life. Because we don't have that, we have the obligation to make this life the kingdom of God, right? And we know that the responsibility is on us because God's not going to do our work for us. We have to do this work. So Unitarian Universalists, whether they believe in God or not, are really engaged in making this life a good life for everyone. We believe in creating equity and justice for all people. We know that in many cases, Unitarian Universalists are very privileged people. We tend to be, demographically speaking, we tend to be in more privileged classes in the US. We tend to be better educated. So we know that we have a responsibility to use the resources that we have to make life better for those who don't have the same resources and privileges.
Mm-hmm. And I don't remember which social justice causes they were, but I remember in history that you have been on the forefront of, let's say, making sure that were they anti-slavery and pro-women's rights and so forth, if I remember.
Yes, those were two of the big social justice issues that we've shown up on the right side of history, as they say. I'll also say that Unitarian Universalists in the US have for a very, very long time supported the rights of gay and lesbian, bisexual, and transgender people. We were among the first to have ordained clergy from the LGBTQ community. We were among the first to celebrate unions and then marriages, even before it was legal to do so in the United States. And we celebrate and promote sexual health and education, even for our youngest people. We have sexual health classes in our churches for starting at age 4 and 5, if I'm not mistaken, and going all the way through the lifespan. So these are really important issues for us.
That's very good. So what is how are the members of the congregations, like what does their worship and their serving in the congregation look like? Because again, I have an experience in the LDS church where, you know, everyone is expected to contribute. You know, there's paying of tithing. There are these things called callings where you're supposed to serve in a position, and it's highly specialized. You know, you have for children, for youth, for adults, so forth. What does let's say the practical religion look like in the UU congregation at Salt Lake?
Okay. In my congregation, we have 2 ministers who are serving, and we have a small staff. So, you know, we have a level of professionalism that some congregations don't have access to. But generally, I would say that Unitarian Universalism has a very high level of lay participation. Because we're an active community and because we're really interested in social justice work. In my congregation, we have a number of social justice activities that we do. We have a refugee resettlement community that invites, when refugees move to the Salt Lake area, our teams help to furnish their apartments and get them connected to jobs and services. We right now are a home to a refugee family, an undocumented family from Honduras that were at risk of deportation, and we invited them to live in our church. They've been living here for 3 years. And we have volunteers that take care of their groceries and their childcare and security for our church building. And then we have, you know, other things like religious education classes for all of our youth. And most of those classes are led by parents in our church. So it's just a few examples of how lay people, but the ministers don't have the authority to sort of tell people, well, this is what you're going to do. We really leave it up to people to say, well, this is how I feel moved to serve, and these are the gifts that I have to offer.
Okay. So what is the role of the umbrella organization? What was it called? The association, or?
That's right. The Unitarian Universalist Association is a covenantal association of all the congregations in the United States. There are different organizations for Canada and Europe, but they are also in covenant with the UUA. So the UUA does not have authority to tell congregations what to do, but they do provide guidance for congregations, and they sort of serve as the preservers of the Unitarian Universalist tradition through history. We have a headquarters in Boston, and we have elected officials as well as appointed lay officials who work together so that there's a real partnership between clergy and lay folk in guiding the association forward. We have an annual meeting called our General Assembly, where we engage in this democratic process of deciding the important issues of our day. We decide on actions of immediate witness, where there's a crisis happening in the social and political movements of the day, and we say this is something we need to act on right away. And then we have statements of conscience, which we decide together as an organization, things that we feel that we need to make a statement on. And we've made statements on many social issues related to the interests of people of color, to women's issues, to LGBTQ issues, to economic and international issues as well.
Okay. And is there like some kind of a like a common treasury or something like, or is there some kind of a financial component that every congregation in the association is supposed to support the headquarters? Or
Yes, if every congregation is asked to contribute financially to the UUA, it's part of our covenantal obligation to our living tradition.
Okay. And so, but do members, they just sort of decide according to their own conscience how much they contribute? Because in the LDS church, it's sort of um, simple. You know, you have 10% of your income is the tithing, and or is there something similar in the UU congregations?
No, we do tell people that Unitarian Universalist congregations do not really have any source of income other than the members. We're not eligible for government grants or a lot of public funding. We're just not eligible for that because of the separation of church and state. So what money we have really comes from the membership. It's beautiful in its way because it's really us funding our dreams, funding what we want to do as a congregation, and how money helps us to live out our values within the community. But we don't tell people how much to give. The UUA does have a recommended scale. Because money is difficult for people to talk about, it's helpful to have something that says, well, here's what people tend to give, and this is what your gift would mean. But we also recognize that it's an issue of economic justice, that
Sure.
10% for a family making not much money is a bigger deal than 10% for a family with a lot of means. So we really leave it up to the families to decide what's appropriate.
All right, that's very good. So let's talk about the Salt Lake congregation. Are there a lot of former Latter-day Saints that join?
I think so, but I think that it's less than it used to be. Salt Lake City is a pretty liberal city within a pretty conservative state. And so it used to be that, now this is my understanding because I'm not a Salt Lake native, so I'm relying on other people to give me this history. But my understanding is that it used to be that there weren't a lot of options for people leaving the LDS faith, but the Unitarian Church has been in Salt Lake since 1891. So we've kind of always been there. And used to have a lot more former LDS folks come to our church. Now there are more liberal church options, and so people can choose, where they prefer to be. But we have a lot of former Mormons in our congregation, and they are such wonderful people. They bring such a strong volunteer spirit. They're interested in religion and they're curious, and they really appreciate the freedom of thought and that sort of balance of free and responsible that they find in our church.
So do most members attend weekly?
Yes. Yes, we have 2 weekly worship services, both on Sunday morning, an early and a late. And then we have religious education for all ages in our on our Sunday morning. So we have a big crowd on Sundays, when it's not pandemic. Right now we've been meeting over Zoom, but we can't wait to get back into our building.
Okay, very, very nice. So now I think it's a good time to also let you talk about your faith journey, or how whatever you want to talk about. Like, basically, you can talk about from childhood on, like what was the religious background in your family, and what you have experienced, and then how you ended up in the Unitarian Universalism.
Sure. So I grew up in the American South, and my family were members of the Church of Christ, related to the Baptist movement, very, very conservative. They sort of had a very rigid role expectation for women. There was no instrumental music in the church. There was no dancing and no alcohol, and very, very conservative. I grew up in that church, and I really loved Jesus. I was a very serious Christian, but I was always very interested in religion. I wanted to know more about the religions of the world, and I started having questions about it when I was in high school and then going into college. When I was in college, I started taking a world religions class, and it really opened up a lot of these questions. Why is our church the only one that's right? And where do we get that idea from? So I started seeking around, looking for other religions and coming into contact with people who were raised in different faiths. I really wasn't allowed when I was a child to go and visit other churches. It was thought that would be a bad influence on me. Well, the result of that, when you keep somebody from doing something, then that's all they want to do, right?
That's right.
So I think the other big factor was that I was beginning to have a feminist conscience when I was in college, and really questioning the rigid gender roles of the church I grew up in. So I finally decided to leave that church. And when I did, it was a very painful experience. My parents were extremely disapproving. They really sort of cut me off. And that was very painful for me. And I think I felt really angry about it for many years. But I still felt this calling to explore world religions. So I joined a pagan group, and I worshiped with this group for 3 or 4 years. And then I got interested in Buddhism. And I started sitting with a Zen group in Chattanooga, Tennessee, which is where I lived at the time. And I became a Zen Buddhist and studied Buddhism for 10 years. And it gave me 2 things that were really important for my own growth. One is just a sense of being able to locate myself, finding my breath, figuring out who I am, having sort of more of an objective view of myself and my own development. The other is that it gave me perspective on Christianity. It said Christianity isn't special. It is one of many religions in the world, and it has a particular cultural baggage that it comes with the U.S. And in many parts of the world, and that Christianity itself is very diverse. When you have 2 billion people worshiping a religion, they're going to do it in many, many different ways, not That's just right. in this one way that I was. So as I was, when I was a Buddhist, I moved to Birmingham, Alabama, which was my hometown. I was moving back home and looking for a place where I could join some Buddhists to sit. And the one place that I found that had childcare, because I was by this time a mother, the one place that had childcare was the Unitarian Universalist Church. They had a Buddhist group that was meeting there. So I started sitting with that group, and then got to know this congregation and thought, wow, I think this is a great place for me to be. So I became a Unitarian Universalist. The irony is that now I'm a Christian again. I rediscovered Christianity when I was in seminary. And it's funny the way that it worked out. I actually came to it through doing anti-racism work, learning what it means for me to be a white person living in the United States, and what's my cultural heritage, what authentically belongs to me. And I realized by doing that Christianity is a treasure that was given to me, and maybe I've been looking at it all wrong. So I came back to my Christian roots and have a new appreciation for that tradition now as a Unitarian Universalist.
Okay, but so you say you came back to Christianity, but can I assume that, or can you comment on, like, do you view Christianity or Christ differently from your childhood religion?
Oh, much differently. Well, assume, being a Unitarian Christian, I don't regard Jesus as a divine person. He was a human being. I don't expect that he's coming back. I don't expect that that there's an afterlife that looks anything like what most Christians believe in. I'm not a big believer in the afterlife. I'd like to be surprised if there is one, but I'm not counting on it.
Sure. Awesome. So this is very, very good. Yeah. Just for the LDS listeners, I want to also mention that the founder of the Mormon religion, Joseph Smith Jr., his father, Joseph Smith Sr., was actually a Universalist, and I'm sure you've heard of this by now.
Yes, I love to tell people who are joining our church, coming out of the LDS church, about Joseph Smith's family being Universalist. And in my own learning about the LDS faith, I can see so many parallels. There's not really if I'm not mistaken, there's not really a concept of hell in Mormonism. It's just different levels of a blessed afterlife. And that strikes me as being very universalist. I think that the LDS faith also has a sort of a positive view of humanity, maybe not quite as optimistic as Unitarian Universalists, but still pretty optimistic. A sense that human beings can change and that they can always do the right thing.
Yeah. No, very much so. Yeah, it's very optimistic. And it's, I think, probably the main difference in experience. Of course, I have not experienced it myself because there is no congregation that I could go, check out in Estonia. But from what I've been able to see online is that, of course, a big major difference is the how much central control, in institutional control, the church has. And the LDS church is very standardized, very centrally directed, and so there are differences, definitely. And the church has specific creeds and that you have to believe and adhere to if you want to be a member in good standing and so forth, which is, I think, awesome that the UU does not have it, because this is something that a long time ago started to rub me wrong, that why should I believe some specific tenets that tenets that I know cannot be proven. It should be more left up to the individual, but such it is. But yeah, I mean, what you have explained today, there are many similarities, and I love the. I mean, to be quite honest with you, Mormonism is not just the LDS Church, right? There are others. For example, there's the reorganized LDS Church or Community of Christ, which is the second largest branch of Mormonism. And in modern times, they have taken very much the route of that is similar to Unitarian Universalism. So I've even heard it said that the Community of Christ is to Mormonism what the UU is to Christianity.
Oh, yeah, that's a very interesting way to describe it. I really did not know a lot about the Community of Christ before I moved here. I did have a professor in seminary who was a member of the Community of Christ, so that was my introduction. But moving here to Utah, I've not only gotten to know some of the members and ministers of the Community of Christ, but I've also discovered there's a lot of internal diversity within the Latter-day Saint tradition as well. I didn't expect to find liberal Mormons here within the LDS Church, but there are. And there are people who are very, very conservative, even fundamentalist. So there's a wide range. And what that's really taught me is not to have expectations when I sit down with members of the LDS faith, that I want to really pay attention to their individual stances on issues, how they relate to the church hierarchy, and how they feel about it. There's a lot of different ways to feel about that. So,
absolutely. And I mean, if I can share my hopes and dreams, I hope that the LDS Church will move towards, something that is more similar to Unitarian Universalism, where there is less exclusivity, less dogmatism, more acceptance of those that are different, from the mainstream. And I think that the LDS Church has a potential, but it has to work through its institutional, let's say, heritage and problems, because it's a very large church by now. It's we're talking millions and worldwide, so it's a bit of a challenge. And the exclusivist truth claims also is a big burden, I think, on the church, that it will take time for them to work through it. But I think they have potential for it, and I think the UU is a good example of how to do it. So maybe one final question then about the church, about the UU is, worldwide, how big is it? How many members? How many congregations? Is there anything in Europe?
Unitarian Universalism is, of course, biggest in the United States and Canada. It's not as well known elsewhere in the world, but I can tell you about some of the exciting places where UUism is present around the world. At one time, the congregation in Prague, Czechoslovakia, was the largest in the world. It had 3,000 members. And this was back in like the 1930s. So it's been a very long time ago. But there is still a Unitarian presence in Prague. And there are some congregations in many of the large cities in Europe. We have a great relationship with the Risho Kosekai Buddhist sect in Japan. We have a great relationship with the Unitarians in the Philippines, a wonderful church in the Philippines. And the Filipino church has a really unique character. They are mainly Christians, and they practice a form of faith healing, which is sort of humanistic, in contrast to the very traditional faith healing that Catholics and practices of indigenous religions in the Philippines do. I think that's really fascinating. I don't know of another faith healing practice in Unitarian Universalism around the world, but the Filipino church is really unique. There's a church in Burundi in Africa, which has been persecuted by their local governments, and we're following that story very closely. Some of their ministers and members have had to escape from the country because of the religious persecution there. So we pray for our siblings in Burundi. There's also a Unitarian church in India, in the Kazi Hills, which has been there for a long, long time. Wonderful community there. And those are the ones that come immediately to mind. But what's so interesting about our international church partners is that, like here in the United States, they take this really local approach. So the principles and sources of Unitarian Universalism take on their own character in the different places around the world. And it just brings more diversity and beauty to our faith.
Is the congregation in Salt Lake City growing? Is it stable? Is it decreasing? What's the trend?
It's hard to say because of the pandemic. We think that we're growing, and the reason why is because we've really shifted to an online platform this year. We've put a real focus on having a beautiful and polished worship service that's available on YouTube. And we're discovering that a lot more people are watching us on YouTube than were present in our building when we were open. So like many churches, we're sort of making that shift toward having sort of a hybrid presence on Sunday morning. And we are still having new members joining our church, even though some of them have never even been in our building. So it's really exciting.
Mhm. So to join, what do they have to do?
Joining requires just three things. First is to accept the covenant of the congregation, and every congregation has its own covenant, but you're agreeing to have a certain kind of relationship with the other people in your congregation. The second is to sign our membership book, make it official. And the third is to make some sort of a financial commitment to the sustenance of our congregation. Again, it's up to the person how much they want to give, but some sort of a commitment indicates that you are interested in supporting the congregation in the long haul.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. Monica, I want to thank you. I know that you now have other things to attend to, but this was awesome. I learned a lot, and I want to wish you and the UU congregation all the best of luck and all the blessings that you desire. So thank you very much again.
Thank you so much. And I'm sending all of our best thoughts to you and to your listeners in Estonia and wherever they're tuning in from.
Thank you very much. Take care.